Hello and welcome to my Azure Quick Hits video series. In this video we're going to show you how to set up the NSX T PublicIP on AVS and use it for both DNAT and SNAT, as well as a couple of interesting gotchas that you should be aware of. This is what our lab environment looks like, and the key pieces we're going to be looking at today are down here the AVS solution, connection to the dedicated MSCE, and then the access to the public internet, which is using this NSX T PublicIP feature. We're also going to connect through the vWAN to a domain controller and just check the behavior from the domain controller back down to the AVS workloads and from the AVS workloads back up to the domain controller or the jump box. So to get started, log into the Azure portal and then select your AVS SDDC and then go down here and select Internet Connectivity. Choose Connect using the public IP down to the NSXT edge. So the first thing we need to do is actually add some public IPs. So we'll add a public IP in here. This one I'm calling AVS NSX T PIP, and we're going to choose 4 addresses. Then we're going to hit on Configure, and you're going to see a pop-up here, and this can take up to 20 minutes to complete. Once this is complete, we're going to click on I confirm executing this change and click on Save, and that'll take another 10 to 20 minutes to finish before we can move on to the next step. Okay, so we've finished here, and in fact that's all we need to do in the Azure portal. So now let's flip over to the NSXT interface, and just notice that our public IP address range is 20.95.39.0 to 39.3, so that's the 4 IPs we've got. Before we do that, let's just look and make sure we understand where we are. So I'm actually going to domain control. I'm going to do 2 things. One, I'm going to open up an RDP connection down to one of the machines down here. I think we'll choose 192.168.104.10. And we're also going to open up the NSXT console. All right, first let's set up an RDP connection to 192.168.104.10. And you can see we've got a good connection. So let's expand this full screen, and we're going to get our command window here, clear it out. This is where it gets interesting. Now you'll notice I've loaded the PowerShell module, so I just typed in PowerShell. If I do a testnet connection back to the domain controller to 10.5.5.4 on port 3389, watch what happens. This actually fails. So a connection from an Azure virtual machine down to AVS works fine, but an AVS workload back into Azure fails. And the reason for that is we don't have a no-SNAT rule set up yet in NSXT. So that's what we're going to do next. There we go. See, it failed. So a quick recap. We've got an RDP session set up from the domain controller here, through the vWAN, through the express route, and down to here, VM4. But when we try and connect back to the domain controller from the workstation here, or back, in fact, to any workload in Azure, it's going to fail because we don't have a no-SNAT rule in place. So let's go and fix that. So let's log into our NSXT console, and then we're going to go to networking and go to NAT. We're going to change the tier 1 gateway. And you'll see here we have our default. This is the rule that's created when we enable the NSXT public IP. And you can see the translated port associated with this rule is 20.95.39.3, which is one of the IP addresses from the range we set up when we first set up the connect using your public IP from NSXT. What we have to do now is add a NAT rule, and we're going to call it No-SNAT to Azure. It's going to be a no-SNAT rule. The source IP is going to be specific in this case. We're going to do 192.168.104.10. That's the machine we've been connecting to that sits inside AVS. The destination IP, we're going to make that 10.5.4.0/22, and that's our addresses in Azure. Okay, make sure it's enabled and change the priority. In my case, I'm going to choose a priority 5, and I'll explain why in a minute. All right, and not a bad idea to put an explanation in here. You can use tagging if you want, and you can enable logging. I'm not going to do that in this case. So let's click the save rule in this rule. Wait until you see the status, or you can do a quick refresh here, see success. And now if we go back to that Azure VM and we run a testnet connection to 10.5.5.4 on port 3389, it should succeed. And there we go. It's ping and it's true. Bear in mind, you have to add these no-SNAT rules for your on-premises environment and your Azure environments to allow workloads in AVS to go out to and find those on-prem workloads. Otherwise, they get directed directly to the internet and it'll drop the packets. So the default outbound IP address is the one that was created by the rule that's instantiated when we actually configure the outbound IP for NSXT. What happens if we have a machine here that has a fixed IP address outbound? So we want it to go out along this NSX T public IP, and instead of using the default of .3, we want it to use .1. To do that, we're going to go back to our NAT rules again, and we're going to add a NAT rule. And this one, we're going to call outbound specific rule 1. This rule is going to be a SNAT rule, right? The source IP, again, we're going to use our 192.168.104.10. We leave nothing on the destination IP, but we are going to put the translated IP to 20.95.39.1. We'll make the priority on this one 10 and save it. Click refresh here. Success. Now we'll go back to that RDP session, and you can see here we have the original 20.95.39.3. So let's go back to here and type in what is my IP address, and you can see we've still got 20.95.39.3. And you can see that didn't work. Why? Well, if we go back to here, the internet outbound rule has a priority of 9, and our outbound specific rule has a priority of 10. So we have to change this because it's hitting this rule first. So let's edit that and change the priority level to 7. Click on save, click on refresh, go back to our session here, rerun this, and we'll see the IP address is now changed on this box to 20.95.39.1. So finally, let's minimize this one, and we'll minimize the console here, get rid of this, and we're going to RDP into 103.10 instead of 104.10. Expand this out, load up our browser, type in ipaddress.com, and you're going to see other machines that aren't impacted by that specific rule are going to continue to use the original .3 address as their outbound IP address. Finally, we're going to set up a DNAT rule that's going to allow access through the internet across this NSX T public IP and down to our VM here on VLAN 4. So back to the NSX T console, select networking, select NAT, and then change this to the tier 1. And then we're going to add a NAT rule. We're going to call this rule DNAT to VM4. It's DNAT rule. The source IP address is going to be empty because it's anywhere on the internet. The destination IP address is going to be the public IP. So that's going to be the 20.95.39. In this case, we're going to use 2. And the translated IP address is the address of the VM we want to hit, which is going to be 192.168.104.10. Put a description here. And I think we're going to enter destination port, so we're just going to allow it on 3389. Okay, and the service, we can actually choose the service here, so we can type in RDP. That's it. Click on save, click refresh, make sure this is a success, and now we can go and launch an RDP client to connect to 20.95.39.2. And you can see there we have connectivity. And there's our testnet connection we did back up to 10.5.5.4. Okay, that's it for this video. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below, and I'll see you in the next video.